get started, and if other people join us, don't have to get caught up. And since we have at least a couple people who've not been with us before, I think we should go around and briefly introduce ourselves. And to make it simple, I'll ask you rather than trying to see who goes next. So I'm Steve Kay. I'm the Vice Mayor and the Chair of this committee. Jennifer?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Sutton. I'm Vice Mayor Kay's legislative aide.
And Walt?
I'm Walt Garfield. I'm president of the Fayette County Neighborhood Council.
And Sally?
I'm Sally Warfield. I'm the legislative aide for the 3rd District Council office.
Jim?
Good morning. I'm Jim Duncan with Division of Planning Director.
Ashley?
Hi, I'm Ashley McGuire with Fayette Alliance. I'm here on Brittany's behalf today.
Paul?
Hi, I'm Paul Knowles. I'm with UK as Planning Director.
And Hal?
Good morning. My name is Hal Bailey. I'm the senior planner that's typically associated with zone changes and zoning ordinance text amendments for the Division of Planning.
Thank you. Tracy?
Hi, Tracy Wade. I am the Planning Services Manager, so I am situated kind of between Jim and Hal.
All right. Chris?
Good morning. I'm Chris Woodall. I'm the manager of long range planning for the Division of Planning.
Jean?
I'm Jean Scott, a committee member and a resident of South Hill.
Stan?
Dan Harvey with Lord X Sergeant.
And I think that's everybody. Thank you all for being here. I think a special welcome, if I can, to Paul Knowles, who is here to help us understand some about the area that we've been looking at in relation to UK's acquisition plans and how they deal with their boundary. So I appreciate his being with us this morning. First item on the agenda is draft summary from October 13th. Are there any questions, comments, concerns, or proposed changes to the summary? Seeing none, we will accept that as submitted and go on to the discussion we've been having about the possibility of some upzoning right along the Nicholasville Road corridor in relation to the Nicholasville Road, Imagine Nicholasville Road plan, and in specific the area on Waller Avenue. So where we left off, I think, was with the information that Sally had provided us. Sally, do you want to just kind of pick it back up and then we'll proceed?
Sure. So originally, last time we met, I had pulled together kind of a rough Google map of the areas around Waller Avenue, because I was just based on anecdotally, that is where I suspected the most rental property concentration was. And so I figured that would be where we would most likely look at changing things from smaller rental to larger rental. So going up to like R4s. Since then, I have gotten with GIS and we were actually able to pull the full study area for Imagine Nicholasville Road. And I've been able to populate that the same way that I populated my Google map, but with much greater accuracy. So before I show my map, the shorthand is this. The blue are residences that the mailing address is different than the site address. So in other words, it is safe to presume they are not owner occupied, right? Doesn't mean they're rental. They could be second homes. They could be Airbnb instead of like a traditional rental, but for whatever reason, the owner is getting the mail somewhere else rather than at the property. And then the greens are going to be your multifamily, and the magenta purple ones are your commercial. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. and I hope you all can see this really well. This is the whole Nicholasville Road area here. You can see this black outline. I used 2 different maps to get that, and that should be a correct representation of the UK acquisition area. So the area that we were talking about previously is Waller, and it is right here on the border of the UK acquisition area. And as you can see, we have a whole bunch here that is presumably not owner occupied residential, with a few bits of multifamily and then some assorted commercial. So this is the area that we were looking at last time, and I will stop there, Vice Mayor, if you want to pick that back up. You're muted.
I am. Okay. So I guess the question that we had come across at the end of our last meeting had to do with how we ought to be thinking about this, given what the university plans or does not plan to do. And I had expressed an opinion based on work I'd done a fair amount of time ago with the UK about the way in which they approach that. But I appreciate Paul, your being here this morning. Can you just talk a little bit about how that boundary functions in UK planning? And I guess the main question for this committee is how stable is that, and what does that mean about ways we ought to be thinking about the possibilities of upzoning in that area? So if you're willing,
Sure.
I'd like to hear from you.
My current understanding is like yours. The boundary is, I feel, fairly accurately represented there. And I would believe that it's pretty stable for the, foreseeable future.
Okay.
Yeah. We are, yep, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, can you maybe a little bit more about how if the university were to expand, how the university thinks about that boundary, and is there a process for expanding, and what does that mean about long-term plans, notices, all of that?
Right. Right now, expanding the boundary is not in the plans. We would probably work with the city and discuss options in the future if we were looking to expand that boundary some. Right now, we believe it meets our needs with its present location across from the agriculture campus. We recently, the green multifamily apartments that were there, we sold those because our interests are not in expanding in that direction at this time. So we've kind of developed the boundaries that we currently have. We don't plan to exceed those boundaries at this time.
Okay. And how long has it been since the university has modified that boundary?
Small boundaries up by Reynolds Warehouse, if you could scroll north a little bit, have been adjusted just a little bit in recent years. But other than that, I don't believe there's been any major changes to the boundaries in what I recall in the last few years.
Okay, that's helpful. Anybody else have a question about kind of the university's position at this point? Okay. At the beginning of the meeting, we had people introduce themselves, so I'm going to call on 2 people who've since shown up. Councilmember Lamb, can you identify yourself and I guess just a word?
Thanks. My apologies for being late. I'm Councilmember Susan Lamb, 4th District Councilwoman, and sorry I missed the first 8 minutes of this. I appreciate Mr. Knowles being here today from UK to share with us any valuable information as we take on this conversation. So.
Okay, thank you. And Richard?
Hello, Richard Young with Civic Lex. Also sort of sometimes take off my Civic Lex hat and I'm just a first district resident. But yeah, again, in addition to Councilmember Lamb, I'd like to apologize for being a few minutes late and say, how valuable this information I think will be as Lexington looks to address some serious issues in our community. So thanks for asking us to introduce ourselves.
Okay, and I think the two of you know probably everybody else except Mr. Knowles. So Sally, the map, and I'm sorry, now I've lost the thread. There's a question of focusing on a particular area.
Yeah, well, I mean, this was the area that we had started focusing on in the last meeting, but quite frankly, I have filled in all the gaps for the rest of the Imagine Nicholasville Road area. So I was kind of hoping when people went through their packet, if they saw any other concentrated spots of multifamily or, rentals or anything like that, like maybe over here, that they might be able to add to the conversation and say, hey, I wasn't thinking about that, but perhaps that would be viable as well. There's some stuff over here on Shawnee. And I mean, it goes all the way back out to Man of War. So if there's anything that anybody spotted or wants to look at or is thinking about, now would be a good time. I think there's one here that is clearly already backed up to some multifamily, and here are still some individual rentals. So that could be a consideration. There's just a lot of information here. And if anybody wants to see anything or talk about anything, that's kind of what I was hoping we would get.
Okay.
It's quite a bit here.
Sorry, my computer is not allowing me to shift back to the view. There we go. I'm sorry. My computer was going to the shop this afternoon. I didn't want to send it this morning because I had this meeting and it's just been driving me crazy. Okay. But if I can, let me ask Mr. Knowles one more question. And this is, again, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you've heard a little bit about what we're talking about. I guess the question is, does the university have any concerns about potential upzoning in areas that are immediately adjacent to the boundaries, such as those portions on Waller Avenue? Is that something we ought to be in conversation with the university if, in fact, this committee thinks that there's some way to amend our zone text and make some zone changes and up level those for more density?
I'd be happy to be part of those conversations. I don't believe the university has any concerns about that. I think from what I've understood and what I've heard from George Ward, this sounds like an interesting and great opportunity for the city and for UK to increase the density, look at transportation along Nicholasville and Limestone. So I think we see it as benefits as well.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. And I think at a minimum, what we'll do is, if it's okay with you, we'll get your direct contact information. I guess we must have it since you got the Zoom link. And essentially just keep you in the loop, and you'd be welcome to join, not join, and we understand that you have plenty else on your plate, but we appreciate you being here today. And as we have this conversation, I think it would be helpful to have you here. So, okay, other folks, comments, questions about the map and kind of where we are at this point?
Vice Mayor, you have 3 people that have their hands up. Maybe perhaps you might not be able to see them. 4 people now.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go across what is the top of my screen. and get the hands. So Chris Woodall first.
Yeah, I just had a quick question for Paul. I know that you said the boundary wasn't going to change, or there was no plans for that boundary to change in that direction. But you also haven't acquired the properties there yet. I'm curious as to what you all have planned for the area that's sort of directly adjacent to the study area that we're talking about in terms of uses. Like, do you have at least a broad idea of the types of uses that you'd be putting in that the area adjacent?
Where the existing hotel is, or former hotel?
Yes,
right,
yes, right around in there. Everything on Waller to the north to where the study area is.
Right. Future uses for that could be office space for our healthcare sector. Could be ambulatory care, services like that.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just jump in briefly. It may not be obvious to everybody, but the acquisition boundary isn't just what the university presently owns. And I think that's what Chris was referring to, that there's essentially the university signals its intention to say, at some point, this might be property that we would like to acquire, and the public needs to know that. So that's the status of some of the stuff that's right around what we were talking about.
Yeah, as in
Thank you, sir.
relating to that, if the university owned it, it's not represented in the map. I took everything that was categorized as exempt and I turned the colors off basically. So everything the university owned would be considered tax exempt. Everything LFUCG owns is tax exempt. So if it is registered as exempt, you don't see it. If you see it, UK doesn't own it.
Okay, and there are properties within the boundary that UK does not own, and that's
yes,
okay.
Correct.
All righty, thank you. Walt?
Yeah, my question would be, would the university have any future interest in like another public-private arrangement to provide more living space for university students in the area we're looking at? Were the zoning to, well, you know, of course, the UK is not subject to zoning anyway, but is there an interest there in doing something like that that could maybe take up a part of that area?
I would say that was always a possibility. I do think the area directly across from Waller would probably tend to be more of our healthcare focus, like I said earlier. But other areas around in the acquisition zone on campus proper and that kind of thing, other P3 opportunities are certainly willing to be considered.
Thank you.
Stan?
Yeah, thanks, Vice Mayor. Chris asked my first question, of course, not surprisingly, which is just trying to get a flavor. And Paul, I know, as I understand it, UK is kind of going through a healthcare master plan right now, and I assume some of that will address, you know, that's not totally determined there. And then Walt, of course, asked my other question, which was just, as we looked at the area around it, we were viewing it in the sense that maybe there's kind of a whole district that will emerge there at the medical center. And it could have housing or retail, which might not be the university's focus, but might be part of the city's focus. And so as we looked at the rezoning, we were just trying to understand UK's support and ideas and what was in play and not, and then what would be next door, because that would, of course, affect it with, particularly like Walt said, some of the conversation had been, well, there could be, for instance, some limited retail that's developed near the medical center. And maybe that's private, but could also be housing or something, and could see that possibility. But if not, then it's most likely just an upzoning to some type of housing by itself was kind of our general conversation. So I think you all have asked my questions. Thanks. I think we're all thinking the same way. And Paul, I don't know if there's a timetable where you feel like the university will have a little bit more idea of some of its immediate plans.
Well, I think what the master plan you mentioned for the healthcare side, once that's complete, we'll have a little bit more clear picture of kind of that area next to Waller, University Avenue, State Street, for sure, I would imagine.
Okay. Anything else before we kind of shift to the staff giving us some idea about government initiated zone change in that process. Yeah, Sally.
Got one question, and it's a related but not exact. The area on the other side of Maxwell, where Stone Ave is, that has always been outside the acquisition area, and I was wondering if there's ever going to be a chance that that's going to come in.
I'm sorry, I'm looking at that on your map just to see the location to be sure.
So Sally, are you talking about the
North.
the north side of Maxwell that was subject to a zone change request that got denied?
Yeah, the upzoning that occurred was trying to occur there. Yeah.
I would probably refer back to my earlier statement about the boundary probably being set in that area.
Okay. All right. Just curious.
All right, Gene?
Are you talking about a new request to upzone, or is this going back to a year or however long ago that building was proposed?
There is no, so far as I know, there's no new requests.
Okay.
And I see
Okay.
Jim shaking
So
his
we're past,
new request. No
we're
new
past
request
tense
on that.
then. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Jim, do you want to kind of jump in and talk a little bit about the process that we might be able to employ if we were to look at specific areas that we thought would benefit from the upzoning?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And we provided a couple of documents also, and Jennifer just sent those out. So, and she sent them out because we just provided them late yesterday. So we apologize for the lateness of that, but we did provide some information. And one thing that we don't say on there is what we recommend for the zoning. Now, we have had that detailed discussion internally, but aware that we're dealing with private property, we want to be careful how much we talk about what the possibilities could be and kind of on the record sort of thing, realizing this is a meeting on the record. So it's really just for discussion purposes. And I think, when we're talking about up zoning, we're talking about taking the zone from what it is now that has limited land uses to something that has more. And most of the area that we're talking about around Waller Avenue is an R2 zone, among the most useless of our residential zones as far as development opportunity. So from a value standpoint, it doesn't have as much as something else would. And Paul, I think that may have been what the Vice Mayor was getting at, or when we talked about if we were to change this zoning to a higher level, an R3 or an R4, that makes that property more valuable all of a sudden and more challenging to acquire, I suppose. So that I'm sure that's part of the conversation as well. And we certainly would not want to compromise UK's ability to acquire property in an economic way, but we also want to see what we can do about activating these areas and making them better as well. So Vice Mayor, we can have the discussion without documentation except for the map that we prepared about what the zoning possibilities could be in these areas. And then Tracy and Hal have prepared sort of a detailed Word document about what a government initiated zone change on private property process is like. It's not something we do very often, but there is a means to do that. And we can talk about both of those in either order that you'd like.
I guess whichever way you want to do it, if it doesn't make any difference.
Well, and looks like Stan may have a question before we go too far.
I know you're shocked. Thanks, Jim. I think we asked this question before, that you felt like a lot of the area in Imagine Nicholasville Road is commercial and shopping center and already had the text amendment. Did the implementation of Imagine Nicholasville Road was planning, anticipating any other areas that you were thinking of for implementation and or land use changes?
Well, we're still globally looking at the B3 zone. So the areas that have the B3 zoning along Nicholasville Road could potentially be subject to some more permissions or changes like we did with the B6P. And then of course we're facing one right now, a reuse of a piece of property that goes in the opposite direction of Imagine Nicholasville Road. So we've got the individual parcels that we're having to monitor and try to make sure that those stay in compliance with what the plan calls for. So Stan, to answer, that's a long-winded way of saying the B3 is still a possibility for reconsideration. Specific sites, I don't believe we really have anything that we've identified that we're focused on right now.
Can I ask one more question? I just read through the plan, which is very nice. There's the notion in the long term, if we're successful in getting bus rapid transit in Nicholasville Road, to have station area prototypes, if I followed. In your mind, is that something you might consider in the future as an overlay or something, or what's kind of the thinking of those station area discussions?
Chris, how can we talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are looking at that. If in the plan, we've got our different typologies and those are related to our station areas. So I don't know that we have a concrete way that we're looking to install that into the zoning ordinance, but we have a group of folks here internally that are looking to ways that we could do that. So we are looking, as Jim said, we are looking at the B3, which would help on Nicholasville Road, but also globally throughout the community too. But we are also looking at more specific zoning ordinance text amendments that could help with that. We just haven't zeroed in on a particular strategy for how we want to do that. So more coming, I guess, is to say, but nothing is imminent at this point.
Okay, thanks.
So is the thinking about looking at the B3 to amend the text so that I think this is what you mean. It would allow a greater latitude in the terms of the type of development that could occur within a B3. Is that fair to say?
That's the question, Vice Mayor. And of course, the challenge with that, unlike the B6P where we simply added the residential to it, the challenge with B3 is it also has a lot of our less desirable uses in it as well. And so you start thinking about car lots and pawn shops and adult businesses and places like that in relationship to residential uses. So that's what makes that one probably why we haven't fully tackled it yet. And that's going to be the challenge to look at that, is how can we do just exactly what you said and increase the uses, particularly residential, but do so in such a way that we're not creating areas that are not desirable for residential and yet still accommodating these uses that we have to provide a means for.
Thank you. Okay, then back to whichever of you wants
So,
to start.
Vice Mayor, why don't we talk about the process, since that is fairly unusual for us, and I would, if you don't mind, I'd invite Hal and Tracy to walk us through what a government-initiated zone change for private property process would look like.
Okay.
So we've put together that sheet that basically lays out the process overall. It is not dissimilar from a typical timing of a zone change process. However, since it is coming from the government, it does not require some of the other elements that are really positioned within the zone change process for an applicant-driven zone change. Since Tracy has done this far more than I have, I'll let her go through the various different elements of this.
I just want to make sure that everybody has the document in front of them. It makes it a little easier to walk through it. It's got the blue horse at the top and it says steps involved in requesting zoning amendments by the Planning Commission or Council. Everybody have that? Cool. So generally we don't.
I'm sorry, since that just went out, I guess, do we need to put it up? Is it possible to put it up?
Sure.
On the screen?
Let's see if I can share.
How many people don't have it right now? I just got it. Everybody else has it? Everybody else has it, then Yeah, it's probably easier to just talk it through.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Sounds good. So with any zone change, just as a general overview, for KRS 100 regulates zoning and planning for Kentucky, and that's our enabling legislation. And it specifically says that the only entity that can rezone a property is the property owner or the Urban County Council or council, fiscal court in other counties, or the planning commission for the community. So when a property or an area of properties is desired to have some sort of rezoning, whether it's a upzoning, a downzoning, or an overlay, those requests come to the planning commission most often, but every once in a while will also go to the council. And in those cases, it's really just a preference of the group that's asking for the zone change of who they, would like to ask. There's not really, if it's a recommendation that came from a small area plan, I think they're more likely to go to the planning commission. If it's a recommendation that came from the council and something else, they might approach the council to request that. So in any case where it's multiple properties and we have the possibility of a property owner saying, no, don't include me. And I think that's any case where you have lots of properties. The planning commission, for the most part, I would say probably 75% of the time, is the entity that takes on the responsibility of the zone change. So there's a request by a group, whether it's a neighborhood association, the IR committee, we have one coming soon for the industrial authority, whatever that group is, makes a formal request to either the planning commission or the council to initiate a zone change. And that is what really kicks off the process once they've determined the what and the where. So the what and the where is varies depending on the situation. But they submit a request, whoever that is, to the commission or the council, and then attend a meeting where that would be requested and kind of state their case with that assistance of the staff as to why and what the request is for. And then from that point on, if the planning commission or the council agree to be the applicant, it sort of shifts from the requesting party's application to now be the planning commission or the council's request. And it's now their application. So in those cases, the planning staff prepares all of the application materials. We do the mailing, we do a notice map, we do the application information, legal descriptions if those are necessary. And we also send all of the information out to the property owners that are involved at least 30 days in advance of a zone change. And then we still do the typical notice that goes to the property owners within 500 feet at that 21-day notice time. So there's actually a double layer. So an applicant or an owner, property owner within the area would get notice first. And hopefully there's been some sort of engagement process with the owners prior to it coming forward. But they get notice first, and then it goes to any, adjoining or nearby neighbors in that area. And then it goes through, as Hal said, the normal zone change process. It gets reviewed by our staff, gets reviewed by a zoning committee, which is half of the planning commission. Then the planning commission can have a public hearing and take input on the zone change. And then they make a recommendation onto the council. And the council has the opportunity to have a second public hearing or to move the item through with two readings of an ordinance. With any zone change, there's 3 layers of notice that occurs. I mentioned the letters. So letters go out via first-class mail. We also post signs on the property. When it's a larger area, our staff may ask for assistance for that. And we post it throughout a neighborhood or an area that's being rezoned. We make sure there's multiple signs advertising the date of the hearing, and that gets the people who maybe didn't get notice, first class notice as an owner. And then we also are required to put a legal advertisement in the newspaper for the meeting. And more recently, the state law has been adjusted so that our legal advertisement in the newspaper is actually fairly minimal, but it directs you to LFUCG's public notice webpage, and that's where the additional information is available. So.
One thing that I would add, and Tracy kind of touched on this, is the outreach aspect of this. With any type of rezoning of large swaths of land, probably the most comparable example is an H1 overlay, which we've experienced several times over the past couple of years, in which there is a notification earlier that there has been an inquiry about this. That's usually sent out with postcards that are mailed out to every property owner in the area, and then it has returned postage and it's sent back with their preference associated with the potential zone change. And in this case, as it is a government authority that would be instigating or implementing some sort of change, it's always best to make sure that all members of the community who are going to have their property affected, whether it would be an H1 or with an upzoning like this, are knowledgeable prior to a public hearing or even the submission of the application.
And that could be via the postcard mailing, although it wouldn't be the way everything fell out when we ended up requiring that. It's a bylaw change for the Planning Commission, and they require themselves to provide early notice or early, they solicit opinions early on about initiating a zone change, but it doesn't specifically, it's only for overlays, doesn't specifically say a rezoning up or down. I would think that we would want to encourage either that mode of soliciting feedback or some sort of public meeting prior to, moving forward with anything.
Yeah, that's what I would just sort of add on to that too, with the sort of emphasis on public outreach that we're talking about with all our zone changes and the guidance that the Planning Commission has sort of sanctioned with the public engagement toolkit. We'd be looking, I think we would recommend that we also reach out not only to the property owners affected, but those around to talk to them about, what the rezoning is, what it means, why we're doing it, and to get some of their feedback early on in the process before maybe even before we start the formal process. And that's what we're asking other applicants to do. And so I think for us, that's what we would want to do as well.
Something that's a little different than a regular zone change is there's no development plan that comes with it. The government doesn't develop a plan for those properties, even though you might be changing from an R2 to an R4 or B1 or something where a new use could be anticipated or higher density. There's not a development plan that the government prepares. That would come later by the property owner.
Okay, so my sense from what you've said is that there is a whole apparatus in place, but from our perspective, I think from the perspective of this committee, there is an additional initial step, and that is that we as a committee would have to make a recommendation. And I'm assuming this would be a recommendation to council. So it's a report to council that says, here's what the Redevelopment Committee is interested in doing. We would want the approval of council to initiate this particular zone change. And then all the rest of the apparatus would apply. So we would have one kind of earlier step. So does that sound right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
And so that's essentially where we are now is, do we want to make any kind of a recommendation of that sort to begin this entire process? So then it would go to council for their agreement to initiate the zone change and then everything else that you've said. So, okay. Anybody else questions, comments? Stan?
Vice Mayor, if I heard Tracy correct, just to make sure, it could technically be the Planning Commission, correct?
Yes, it could. The planning commission could look at the small area plan and come to the same conclusion and initiate as well. But since this is a subcommittee of the council, it seems like it would make more sense to report back to the council.
Yeah, I think all the planning requirements aside, the way that the council functions, I think some of my colleagues might not think it appropriate for us to go from here to the planning commission or to the staff. So, and you know, we can talk about that.
I'm sorry, just to
go ahead.
At the same time, they are the official planning body, so I guess I would want to make sure they were at least in agreement or understood, you know, before because they're the ones, to me, you know, appointed to look at these kind of issues, and it does make sense that go to council. I guess I was just trying to think through process and protocol. It would seem like planning commission would need to be on board that we were even going to suggest this a little bit.
Yes, although the way it works now, that if the council initiates the request, it goes next to the planning commission. But I hear you, at least informally, would like to make sure that I guess information about what we're doing could go to the planning commission at one of their work sessions, just as a heads up. While we're moving it forward, I mean, the timing, it gets a little tricky. Jim, you look like
Vice Mayor, not to jump in front of the people who have their hands raised, but just been our recent experience in taking initiatives to the council, that if it wasn't the council's idea to begin with, it's really, really hard to get it through. So even though it's been blessed and sanctioned and unanimously sent forth by the planning commission. So if the council sort of is in on it from the very beginning, they know what to expect, and it may be an easier course by the time it goes through the planning commission and comes back to them.
That's a good point. Okay, I've got 3 hands up. First, Walt.
I think it makes sense to upzone this and make the area a higher density area. I was wondering, is there a way to incorporate some sort of, I know you need flexibility in development and that sort of thing, but is there a way of providing some sort of basic overlay associated with the upzoning so that you don't end up with structures that are incompatible and all over the place? Is there a way to incorporate some design in it? I know you're very restricted on being able to require design.
Well, conditional zoning restrictions that Fayette County is able to implement can address use, and I've seen them address the height of a building and limit it to like a certain number of stories. But beyond that, there's not been, it can also address landscape buffers, and I think historic, if it's already a historic district, then you can address the more aesthetic pieces of that. But if it's not, and of course this is not, then conditional zoning doesn't address any of those.
I think it might be useful to at least think about it, and I wouldn't want to require anything very restrictive because it would prevent development. But I think you don't want to get something like Burly American as your outcome, even though you want higher density.
And we've thought of that in other cases. Conditional zoning restrictions, unfortunately, are really meant to restrict a property rather than promote a certain density. And then while the small area plan can promote those things, and this is covered by the corridor plan within Nicholasville Road, some of the recommendations therein require further analysis onto how to promote the higher density or the minimums, maximums that are called for within that study. So right now, I don't believe, unless you have another study that gives architectural detailings or minimums that are in line with the current zoning ordinance, it provides a bit of a problem.
Yeah, I agree that it's a problem. Maybe some thought would be desirable, at least to think about it. Just think about it a little bit. See if we can do better than, again, Burley American.
Well, I want to point out too, though, I think that what we're already doing is will help like leapfrog the Burley American problem, because nobody went into Burley American like we're doing right now and preemptively upzoned it. It was purchased lot by developers, and then they applied for the upzone, and then they like did this patchwork thing a little bit at a time. It's possible that if we'd done this with Burley and American, I'm not saying that we should have, because in my opinion, if I remember correctly, that was mostly owner occupied back in the day. But if we had done this ahead of time, we might not have the patchwork that's going on there now. So I think that probably this preliminary step will actually help that rather than push it towards that direction.
Okay, but I would agree with Walt. It's worth thinking about if we were to want to move an upzoning forward, what conditions we might suggest be placed on that so that we don't get the unintended negative consequences that can occur. Councilmember Lamb.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. The map that you all provided, Tracy, how many parcels are included in this?
I don't know.
You don't know? Oh, okay. Okay. I know there are. I mean,
Hal and I were responsible for the words. Mr. Woodall prepared the map. So let's
okay. All right. Well,
it was a team effort. It was a team effort.
Unfortunately, Mr. Woodall doesn't have that count either, but I could get that information.
well, no, it's not. I mean, so, okay. So you've got the area outlined in black, and then there's the blue and the yellow that are over near Nicholasville Road. So what's and if you have already had this conversation, I apologize before I got on the meeting, but the blue and the yellow, what does that depict, please?
Well, and Councilmember Lamb, we haven't had that conversation. And we, as I said, we didn't want to put a whole lot of detail on this because we don't want to get ahead of ourselves on this. But we identified those two areas as the properties abutting Nicholasville Road and the ones immediately behind them as perhaps maybe an alternative zone to a pure residential zone. So this may be someplace that we want to look at a B1 zone or something like that, so that we can provide some other non-residential opportunities along the corridor. And then the question about, so that would take care of the parcels outlined in yellow. And then the question was, well, should the ones immediately behind that be either included in that or be part of a different transition as we go back then? And then that leads to, again, kind of jumping ahead, and I know Richard has a question too, but the whole question of should the south side of Waller be considered at all right now? Because I think with UK's explanation about where they are, and certainly looking at the north side of Waller, the properties that abut the railroad and Waller and behind there along University Avenue, I think we would get virtually no opposition, no question about the zone change to an R4 or something like that. But if you're selecting just the parcels that front Waller Avenue on the south side of Waller, then you still have the rest of those parcels behind that. And so that could be a different conversation. So that's part of what we want to talk about too, is what is a strategy for this, knowing certainly that having both sides of the corridor would from a land use perspective make the most sense. But from the actual pursuit of a zone change, how would that work on the south side when that's, not hemmed in by a railroad and a university?
Okay, I appreciate that. And as far as how to proceed, whether it goes directly to the council versus planning commission, I think that I personally value our planning commission. Unlike But and I see that there is an opportunity to be collaborative with them. And I would think that it would be very important to have them along with the ride, because I just feel like that, in my professional opinion, when you bring everybody along at the same point, when you're making a big decision like this for something brand new, a new process, that it seems to me that it bodes well at the end. So I think that it is important also to have our colleagues involved in this process, but to have them initiate the zone change request to the Planning Commission. I do agree with that, but I also think that there is great value to have the Planning Commission members aware of this going forward, because as I've said in the past, you never know when somebody's going to have an aha moment or a really good comment that's going to raise another question to air before you start the process. So thank you, Vice Mayor.
Hey, before I recognize Richard, just if I can insert my own comment. What I think I gathered, Jim, from an earlier comment of yours, is that we have to be careful about how we talk about this, because it does have an impact on the value of the properties. So if I can ask a question, would one possible path forward, should we decide that this is something we think needs to be done and would be helpful, would one path forward be to simply give a heads up both to the council and to the Planning Commission in their work session, respective work sessions, or in the case of council, probably the Planning and Public Safety Committee, essentially just saying, in general, we want to let you know that this is something that the Infill and Redevelopment Committee is thinking about. Early warning, without specifying at that point location or anything else, but just to, again, the threshold question is this something we really want to take on? But if we do, is this one possibility to give kind of early warning? And then if and as we identify, let's say, this area that's now outlined as the appropriate boundary, and we start working on a way to formulate that zone change, then we formally bring it to council for them to initiate, to go to Planning Commission, et cetera. So is that a kind of a reasonable scenario?
Certainly, Vice Mayor, with the Planning Commission, it's very easy for us to have those sort of informal conversations. We do it all the time. We preview with them what's coming next without, having to put it in writing. So, but that's the relationship that we build with them. We meet with them frequently. Whether we could be sort of that informal with the council, we'd be happy to work with you all on that, how to do that. I just know that you raise one question, and as Councilmember Lamb says, there's another one, and somebody else thinks of something else. And so that may be, we just need to be on our toes and ready to go with the council when we preview this with them.
Okay, thank you. Richard?
Great, thanks. So I feel like we've covered this in previous meetings, and I think just my coffee-addled brain is not allowing me to recall it. But is there a local precedence for a government-initiated zone change here in Lexington? And when was that last?
We have done several down zonings of neighborhoods near, and it's almost a little ironic, right? We down zone areas, and then now we're coming back and saying, oh, well, maybe they should have been up. Mostly neighborhoods around UK's campus or around downtown. And those happened in the late 90s. I haven't had very many experience with very many other government initiated zone changes. We did have one for a property we own or we have a long-term lease on Citation that we transferred or accepted a sublease from an industrial user in the Coldstream campus area. Can't think of a whole lot others, Jim.
Tracy, what about the street off of Fontaine? Did the council member, then Farmer, was kind of behind?
I think that was a down zoning.
Yes, it was. Was that government initiated though, or did the government just support them in their effort?
It was because came from a neighborhood association request.
Okay.
Mr. Farmer had another one on, I believe, Ashland, South Ashland Avenue as well.
That's right.
So I guess the sort of part two to my question is, what sort of like public pushback on the idea of a government initiated upzone do people expect? And is there sort of a way to, I don't know about address those concerns, but like provide some sort of educational resources around why this could be beneficial to a community? Larger community context. I don't know if that's too far ahead to think, but.
No, Richard, I'll jump in. I think, as we said, the properties on the north side of Waller that are adjacent to the railroad tracks and adjacent to UK, I would not expect there to be any concern, at least in those areas, because that's all going to be a benefit to those property owners. It's the properties on the south side of Waller Avenue that then you start getting into what potentially could be a Burley American type situation down Elizabeth Street and so forth, that we might have some pushback from those parcels or those properties.
I think that also highlights the need for an awful lot of communication on this and outreach for this. Even with an H1 overlay, which is typically pushed by 50% of the neighborhood, there's usually a fair amount of conversation. There is a significant amount of concern whenever a government is doing something like that. And I think that outreach notification is a major component of all of this.
We want to make
Okay.
sure we're actually helping, right? The government's here to help is not always accepted by property owners because, again, private property rights are pretty strong in Kentucky. So we just want to make sure that it's viewed that way to encourage development or redevelopment in that area.
Okay. I would be actually amazed if we were to go ahead and propose something like this, if there weren't some people who, on the general objection to any increase in density about traffic. And I mean, I think we'd hear some of that, but it's the nature of the business at the moment. So I think that, the clear rationale has to do with the Imagine Nicholasville plan and trying to assure that it is as successful as possible. And citing, this gets a little tricky, but publicly you don't want to brand a particular previous set of developments as negative, but I think there's ways to talk about that as well, and that the intention is to be planful. So, but would there be pushback? Probably. Who knows? And from what quarter? But yeah. Okay. Other questions, comments, thoughts? Anything else, Jim? Oh, tell me I didn't. Oh.
So, Vice Mayor, we have briefly talked about a potential, on this meeting, a potential zoning scheme for this area. I don't know if we want to explore more of that, or if we put enough on the table to digest for now, and we want to finish this up at another time.
Well, unless there's objection, I would say let's go ahead and typically we don't adjourn until noon. we've got another almost half an hour. If you're willing to kind of proceed with kind of what that might look like, that'd be great.
Okay. All right, so I'll share the screen now. Sally's maps are much more informative. Ours is a basic map, but you all have this. So this is what we were talking about. This is the black part, at least along the north, is the UK acquisition limit. So that's, and then here's Waller Avenue as it crosses the railroad tracks coming towards campus and then crossing Nicholasville Road. So we feel that these properties, and Councilmember Lamb, 3, 6, maybe 70 properties, 60 to 70 properties in here or so. Most of them zoned R2, except for this 211, which is an R3. We talked about an R4 zone for this entire sort of block of properties, recognizing that the individual lots may not be sufficient for an R4 development, but certainly if an ownership analysis to see where there might be some adjacent properties, or certainly a developer who is willing to do the work and assemble properties, this would make, you could do some good R4 development in here with the existing street patterns. You've got, kind of a double block here. You could really do a lot with and still have the appropriate frontage along Waller Avenue. So we believe that might be something we want to strongly consider, and then certainly think about what Walt said on some of the things that within statute that we can do to ensure that we're getting the outcomes that we, or at least try to ensure that we're getting the outcomes that we hope for. So R4 for the north side, adjacent to the acquisition boundary. And then for the south side of Waller Avenue, all these parcels, there's one R3 adjacent to the railroad tracks, and then R4 the rest of the way down. I'm sorry, R2 the rest of the way down. And everything fronting Nicholasville Road, except this one little, you can barely see the blue peeking out from under 1305. That is a P1 zone, but everything else is still the R2 in here. From a land use standpoint, R4 would make perfect sense along here. And then we talked about maybe we want to do a B1 along Nicholasville Road that could still allow residential, but that would also allow a mixed use, residential above or behind a non-residential use. And then the question would be, how do you want to transition from the B1 to the R4? Do you just go back into that, or do you make some more of this area B1 as well? Maybe thinking about orienting it into the Forest Park, Elizabeth Street area, kind of neighborhood, truly neighborhood business. So that's kind of what the staff wondered about, Vice Mayor, as far as what we might want to think about for a zoning scheme for this area going forward.
Thank you. Comments, questions, reactions? Let's see, no hands.
Actually,
Councilmember Lamb?
thanks. I find this is a very intriguing opportunity, and especially when you look at the map and you look at the size of the, and I can't see I know Waller Avenue. I can't see the name of the street that's to the north of it, but I can't read that street name.
That's University.
Does it say University? Okay. I mean, I am just envisioning the opportunity because of what Director Duncan just spoke about, that the double width of that. I'm kind of thinking boldly of what could end up being over in this area. And then I try to think of through the lens of many conversations that we've had over the years, is how this could impact either way, positive or negative, to the southern side of this whole area that we're talking about, between the railroad and Nicholasville Road. I know that we had identified this area through Miss Warfield's presentation, but I'm just curious as to, I don't know. I mean, you can't forecast or meditate or mediate or whatever the right word is, figuring out what would happen as a result of this. But find this very intriguing potential. And I guess I'm just rambling here, but sorry, I can't help myself. But I mean, I wonder how many different property owners are of all of these parcels. I mean, are we talking 30 different property owners? Or, I mean, I know I'm sure you all haven't even had a chance to look that up or anything, but I'd be really curious. I would love to be able to poll some of them and just see what their appetite was. If, I mean, this would be a bold step for us, and that could end up, if we do it right, could end up setting a very positive way forward for affordable housing, and maybe even to work with Rick McQuady in making sure how we play this all out for the right end result. So thank you for listening to my ramble. So
Not at all. Got 3 people, starting with Stan.
Thanks. I think it's a great case study that's been proposed. I think with Paul's help and UK's help to just at least anticipate the corner and what might happen in the same blocks, that UK owns, it really could make a big difference and show a good example. The only thing I would add is if we are talking about upzoning, it's probably a good opportunity to also think about the right of way of Waller through that stretch. So, we might show that we're thinking about that, relative to traffic and things like that. That is a pretty constrained section through there. We might want to also think about that kind of issue of at least not requiring anything, but anticipating that ideally you may have an opportunity with redevelopment to have a more cohesive, complete street through there.
Okay, Walt.
Yeah, I agree with Stan that it's probably a good idea to at least look at ingress and egress and transportation and that sort of stuff when you're looking at it. I also think at least be aware of what UK is putting on the other side of the boundary and how to buffer that as well, as well as on where your borders are. It's just a question of looking at it and deciding what it ought to be. And the zoning may or may not do the job depending on what's going to be on the other side of the lines and what the people who own the property on the other side think about it.
Okay, Sally.
So I went back and looked on my map, and this is not opinion, this is just general information. On Jim's map there, the southerly black line, on the other side of that going more south, that's Forest Park. This line there, that is just underneath that south line, that's all rental also. Then you go on the other side of Forest Park that is yet more southerly, starting with like 238. It is still mostly not owner occupied. It's got a few spots that are owner occupied, but not much. Starting with 223 there and going down to like 1493 Elizabeth Street, that goes back to all rental. And then on the other side, there is where you start seeing some hopscotch. It's still a lot of rental, non-owner occupied, but you're getting more owner occupied there as you trickle further down into a southerly direction. So that's what I see on my map. The other thing that I would like to mention when we were talking about pushback, and I appreciate Councilmember Lamb bringing this up, is the idea of affordability. I know that a lot of the objection the 3rd District office heard when the plans for UK acquisition came out was, you just keep destroying affordable housing. This is some of the last remaining affordable housing. I mean, ignoring the point that it's awful housing, it is affordable. And so there was objection to that, not necessarily from the renters themselves, or not necessarily from the people who own the buildings, but just general community advocates for affordable housing. So when we are talking about this block that Jim has blocked out, I'm sure some of that would be considered affordable housing. And if we start to propose that it is replaced with R4 with no consideration for the affordability, there might be some public pushback on that. I do want to say that I absolutely love the little business opening up to Forest Park Road there. That's just adorable. I think that's a great idea. And but I do want to ask about the B1 designation. I know that some pushback that we've heard in the 3rd District about changing things to business include people really don't want drive-throughs because we've got bad enough traffic as it is, and people really don't want more gas stations. So would that be a problem with the B1?
So within the context of any type of zone change, that would fall into uses that we would be able to restrict with conditional zoning restrictions. Based off of what was provided within the Nicholasville Road Corridor study and some of the recommendations that were made for this area specifically, I think that limiting certain uses, including drive-through restaurants and gas stations, would not be out of line. There would also probably be 1 or 2 other limitations that the government would want to put on these properties as in terms of uses. And then with the B1 zone, it would be wonderful to have those kind of businesses there. There's also the opportunity to have multi-storied with business on the first floor and residential above.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything else at this point? Okay. So one thought I had is that it probably would be useful before we try and figure out exactly whether we want to go forward with this or not, is to get some sense of how much of that is rental, or how many owners there are. And then I think I'm interested in having this committee kind of figure out yes or no, is this something we want to pursue at any level, in which case the next steps would be, I think what I've suggested before, information informally to the Planning Commission and to the Planning and Safety Committee of the Council. So that's my thought about next steps to bring back, and then as they say, fish are cut bait on this whole idea. So other thoughts?
I mean, I agree with what you just said, Vice Mayor. I think that those are good next steps. I think that I agree with moving forward in that way. I think that's great.
So on the map, the south side of Waller is indicated. But I think the conversation has basically led to, for the moment, thinking just about the north side. Is that correct? So the area in black that I have on my map includes.
Vice Mayor, we think that this will be the area that you would have the least neighborhood or other concern about. Once we go to the south side of Waller, there are other considerations that come in, but this one, it's hard to see who would oppose who would oppose this.
Okay, so am I not looking at the right map? The map that I'm looking at, Nicholasville Road area for rezoning, the black line goes on the south side of Waller as well as the north side. But you're saying we might be better off to draw the line at Waller.
So, and I'm sorry, the black line actually represents sort of two different things. The northern side of the black line is UK's acquisition boundary. And then the rest of the line is sort of how we carved off from what the research that Sally had done, what might be a sort of a neighborhood or a district or an area that we'd want to consider. Thinking that both sides of Waller Avenue, from a planning perspective, it would make sense to consider those as sort of a redevelopment at all at the same time, taking into account what Stan talked about, coming in with a complete street and ensuring that we've got compatible uses on both sides. But if we're thinking from a strategic standpoint, it might be easier just to focus on the properties that are on the north side of Waller Avenue. Because they are adjacent to UK, the railroad track, and not really anything else that would likely oppose an upzoning there.
Okay, so perhaps that question we can come back to. But is it possible to ask planning staff to do a quick survey so that we know how many property owners there are?
Yes,
I think you indicated there's hardly any owner occupied, but
I think we take Sally's research one step further and see if there are patterns of ownership also. We may find that they're mostly not owner occupied and maybe just a few different owners control it.
right. Okay, so we'll look to have that information at our next meeting, but I get a couple hands. So Councilman, first Jean Scott and then Councilmember Lamb.
Oh, I was just going to say before we left this information is really useful. Planning staff and stuff. And it's, helps us really see the patterns. And on a personal incidental note, I grew up the first 6 years of my life on that block of University Avenue. So brings back old memories. First 6 years.
Well, and I lived for 2 months on State Street when I first came to Lexington in 1971.
Okay, well, I'm 221 University Avenue.
Back when it was mostly UK faculty, and they
That's
were
why we
single
were there.
family. Yeah, it was a whole different place. Councilmember Lamb.
Back to the map, I think that in just talking about this, about Director Duncan talking about the north side of Waller, taking that that square space there, and I'm envisioning that would be project 1, and project 2. I think possibly from what Ms. Warfield was talking about, that we could take the south side of Waller and go over to Forest Green and perhaps include some of that area there, maybe another layer over and include the blue and the yellow area that you all have depicted there on the corner of Nicholasville and Waller. That possibly that could be a project 2. If you go forward and then that way you can take into consideration the infrastructure, the road, because I really think that is a very important point that Mr. Harvey made, because that section of that road needs improvements big time. And I think that is a very positive outcome of that. So I'm just thinking that we could have just created our first 2 proposed projects for this type of upzoning. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Sally, then Walt. You're muted, Sally.
Sometimes the click doesn't work. Thank you. My question's for Mr. Knowles. When we did our road swap, did you take any roads on that side at all?
I don't believe so, but I would have to go back and look at that too.
Okay, I don't think you did, but I mean, that's a question that we should probably answer before we start talking about what we're going to do with the streets, just in case any of them are subject to change once you acquire the properties. But yeah, I think that everything was on the other side. It was back more towards Columbia. I just wanted to ask.
Okay, Walt?
I would ask that staff also look at the properties on the south side of Waller, because the ownership may be very similar to the north side, and that might make a difference in whether to pursue the whole project or not.
Let's see, heads nodding. Okay, Hal.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to talk about the timing of all this. Typically, it is a 4 to 6 month long process. Assuming that the council initiates it, typically it goes to that 4-month timeframe, as they are aware, and it is their application. If you were to separate these out into 2 separate zone changes, you would be adding on your time there. So it would be a much longer time frame. The other aspect of it is when you are submitting an application for a zone change for a large swath of area, that area can contract, it cannot expand. So your initial application, if you came in with a larger area, and then if there was opposition from property owners or from neighbors that you were concerned about, you can shrink that in a little bit. But if you came in with the application just for the north side, you would never be able to expand that to the south without amending your application at a later time, which would add just a bit more time.
Okay. Any other comments? Anything else at all? If not, thank you, Sally, for that good work that kind of got us on this track. It's been very helpful. Thank you to, as always, the planning staff. And unless there's any other business, we have a meeting scheduled next month. And, oh, maybe one last question. We can easy for me to say, we can continue Zooming, I believe, if that is the preference of the group. We can also reconvene in person at this point, if that's the preference. Is there a strong preference one way or the other?
I sure like the Zooming.
I agree, and that's basically, yeah. All right, we'll continue Zooming so long as that continues to be an option for us in terms of all the requirements for openness in public meetings. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Paul, for joining us, and we'll keep you in the loop and welcome you as much as you'd like to be here with us. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.